Welcome to the Smallbrain Podcast. This is episode 13. Today's guest is Skot Wiedmann. So if you don't know about Skot, Skot is the artist and engineer behind the Hyve Synth. So Skot, how about you explain to us and the viewer a little bit what the Hyve Synth is and how you came to this idea?
Yeah, Hyve Synth is this right here. It's a little musical instrument that you can play by touching. It responds in 3 dimensions, how hard you're pressing right and left movements and up and down movements. And so it allows you to kind of do expressive music. It's an analog synthesizer that is a kit that you can build yourself. And I started building it, it was probably about 5 years ago. I was trying to teach people how to solder. I work at the University of Illinois in electrical engineering, and teaching people to solder was always kind of something that I thought was really valuable, really exciting to get students building things. And so I wanted to develop a kit where students could get excited about learning how to solder, kind of get some of their passions into it. A lot of students were really into music and wanted to, learn how to build musical instruments. So I made this as a workshop, and I taught workshops for a few years. And people would come, we would do soldering and solder all the parts on and tune it. And then, people could walk home with the musical instrument that they made. So a lot of students came, and then people from the community. And eventually I started teaching some workshops, like I taught one in Chicago. I'm down here in Champaign, Illinois, which is like central part of the central part of the United States. Right in the middle.
Right in the middle.
Yeah. And it's south of Chicago.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah. And I also, when I studied here, I did my master's in fine art, and I did interactive art with light and sound. We call it new media. And so, and before that, I had been doing electronics since I was a kid, and I've been doing music even longer. So it was kind of a natural thing for me to kind of bring all that together and use it as a teaching tool. Uh-huh. And so I taught these workshops for a few years and got people to come and build these. And then I actually did a workshop in Chicago at a place called Lost Arts, which is run by my friend Charles, who is one of the founders of Kickstarter.
All right.
And he told me, he said, hey, you've got to do a Kickstarter. This would be a great Kickstarter. He really encouraged me. He kind of gave me some direction. And so I launched a Kickstarter about 2 years ago, and made a new version of the Hyve so that people could get one without having to build it. That was one of the things that people wanted, like musicians wanted to just have one. They didn't want to have to do a lot of soldering. And then I also made another version, which was an easier kit. There was no soldering involved, and that's called Hyve Maker. And the one that's all done is Hyve Premium. And then there's also Hyve Hacker, which is just the circuit board, and you solder it yourself. And so I made 3 new versions for this Kickstarter, and had a successful Kickstarter campaign. We got about over 500 backers, and so those have all been shipped out. We fulfilled all those orders, and now we're doing online sales through our website, hyvesynth.com. Me and my partner are working on this. And so right now the project, I just did a workshop a few weeks ago at a festival that was really, really cool. It was a immersive light and sound festival that I also played at. I also play synthesizer and do ambient looping kind of shows.
Yeah. Just with the Hyve Synth, or
that show I brought out some of my weirder gear that I had made before the Hyve.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do play with just Hyve. I also do, lately I've been doing these looping things where I'll use my voice, kind of like a little bit like beatboxing or, vocal sounds looped, and then with the Hyve together to make these ambient textures and rhythms, and kind of building up layers and playing the Hyve over it. So that's kind of what I've been doing lately for my performances. Yeah. Some of it is more avant-garde, some of it is more beat driven.
Is there any place online where we can listen to this concert? Or?
Yeah, I think there is a recording on my YouTube channel. There's a couple of recordings on my YouTube channel, videos of things that I've done.
All right, I'm going to look them up and put them in the description of the podcast.
And there's quite a few other videos on my YouTube channel about different other people playing the Hyve and
Yeah.
other Hyve-related interviews and lectures that I've done and things like that.
Yeah, and I think it got reviewed by a few YouTubers like Cuckoo and Loopop, right?
Right. Yeah.
So this is how I stumbled upon the synth actually, because
Yeah.
it sounded so out there. Like how do you have this idea to use, like, if you want to explain a little bit like the synth architecture, how it's made, how you make sound with it, because I don't see any potentiometers, I don't see a pitch bend, I don't see a filter or an envelope. So how does it work?
Yeah, so there's kind of two components to the technical side that I think are really interesting.
Yeah.
And one is just the touch surface, this type of playing surface. If you're watching a lot of the newest developments in electronic music, you'll see a lot of stuff about multi-dimensional touch.
Yeah.
It's kind of becoming a big thing. And one of my good friends, Lippold Hawken, is one of the people who kind of started that movement. Back in the 80s, he made the Continuum fingerboard, which was a multi-dimensional touch controller.
Yeah, that's
And so I've known him for years.
Yeah.
He was, when I went to school at the university, he was one of my mentors, and now we're friends. And so, yeah, obviously his influence is a big part of what I do. Thinking about the ways that we touch music, the way that we can move and use gestures to articulate and express ourselves. That's like a big part of what this is on the user interface side. And so I really wanted to keep that nuance and that subtlety, the possibility that, moving a little bit could change the sound a little bit, and you could like perform those gestures and have, just like you would with a violin where you give it a little vibrato or you move the bow a little faster. It makes things like really expressive, and it's more personal. You're more involved in the actual sound as it's moving along instead of just triggering a note and having a sample play or something like that.
So would you say it's like, because I like to use like hardware synths, like traditional synths with filters and knobs and stuff like that. And I never could, but some people are making amazing music with virtual instruments.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to me like this kind of instruments, like the Hyve Synth, controllers like the Continuum and stuff like that, they're like the next step in electronic instruments. You get like, the more it evolves, it seems to me like the more it gets analog. Like in the 90s, we had the whole digital era, and 90s, early 2000s, and we had nothing but virtual synth, digital synth. And now we see a return to the analog and some old synths that are revisited, recreated. And now that the technology advances, it seems like instruments like the Hyve Synth, they really get, like, for me as a musician, I really like to create music with my hands.
Mm-hmm.
This is what interested me when I saw the demo of the Hyve. I was like, oh, I can. It's like maybe like a theremin, but that would be different and easier to play, as you say, as a violin. So. What did you like? How did you come to the idea of making something like that? Like, how did you make music before? And you mentioned that you created a few other synths before, I guess, for yourself. And how did you get to this very peculiar instruments? Because how do you, like? All right, you can touch it, but in what way? Because I can see something that resembles a keyboard a little bit, like Steph. And what's above it, like the Hyve pattern?
Yeah. Well, the keyboard is basically a traditional keyboard layout with white and black notes, and even though it looks like it's one octave, it's actually has 6 octaves integrated into the entire space here. So as you move up, you can play higher notes. And then up here, these hexagons are arranged in a harmonic layout, which in music theory is going up one hexagon is a perfect fifth, going up to the right is a major third, and up to the left is a minor third. That's sort of the basis of this whole thing, and that just repeats.
Yeah.
And so it puts a lot of notes together that are in like Western tonality, are related in, triads and things like that. So it was really like, I think what you said about the physical part of it is really important, because to me, there's a real harmony between someone putting components on a circuit board and soldering it and actually physically putting together that instrument on the backside, which the backside looks like this. So you put the components on the back here, and then you can see it's just real thin, and the front of it is the touch surface. So that's how it's put together. And so, you're putting these things on. It's sort of this physical process where when you put a chip on, it becomes an oscillator, and it's a physical place where that happens. And this oscillator is here, and this oscillator is here, and so on. And so as you're building it, you're learning there's a spatial relationship between the structure of it and the physical layout.
Yeah.
And so the way you think about the music happening in different places kind of has a corollary with the top surface, where you're touching it and different things are happening in different places. And as you move, it changes the way things are happening. So, I mean, I wanted to make that connection. I think it's a really important thing, that physical relationship with this object, and it being this relationship where you're learning to touch it, you're exploring, you're finding those spots which make a certain sound, and then you're moving towards some other sound, and you have some space in between that you can explore. And I think that's really interesting. I think it's like, also, just from a technical perspective, giving people like when you put this chip on and this oscillator starts making a sound and you can hear it, and the one next to it doesn't, and then you look closer and you see you've put the chip on backwards or something, right? It's like this. It's sort of like this educational tool where there's a real physical reason why things work or they don't work, or why they're different. And so, as people build it, there can be like this learning process of where things are, how they're put together, and what they do, and then understanding that from a musical context and being able to hear, oh, I hear that that's not playing right. How can I change it? It's like a real visceral way of engaging with this abstract world of like these chips and parts that just seem to be like little pieces of material that you don't know what they do, but when you see that they're put on right and they do something, you start to get that connection between this physical collection of resistors and capacitors and chips and like this sonic world that's created within those. And so I wanted to kind of give people access to that, kind of encourage people to like dive in and see how they can change it, how it can be something that they have like agency with, and that, devices and electronics aren't these abstract things like inside of your phone that you're not allowed to touch, but they're actually like these things you can manipulate and control and be a part of and change to do something that you want. And so I encourage people to hack the Hyve too. There have been a number of really interesting modifications and adaptations and weird add-ons where people are adding knobs and light sensors and stuff that change the way it works. And so as you're playing it, you're getting these other things that you've added on. So it kind of like opens that door to that experimentation and hacking and those things, which I really wanted people to feel like it's something that they own, that they can be part of, and they can change and cut stuff up and rearrange it and make it different. So that was actually the main reason why we made the Hyve Hacker, and it's like supposed to encourage people to do any sort of hacking, come up with new ideas, different ways to make this do something other than what I've designed it to do.
Would you say, because you mentioned before you have several, like you can buy the Hyve as a kit.
Yeah.
Would you say it's a great piece of kit for someone who wants to get into electronic soldering and stuff like that, or is it something that's maybe for someone that's who's more advanced?
It's probably a medium level difficulty. If you have done through-hole soldering, like where you put the wires through the hole and solder it in and cut it off, if you've done that and you're good at that, this would be a good first project for surface mount. So surface mount, basically, there's no wires or legs on any of the parts, but the way they're attached is just by soldered onto the surface of the board. And so I don't know if it will show up, but for example, you can sort of see.
Yeah.
some of these components here. They're really pretty small, and they're just soldered right onto the surface. So it's not the easiest thing to do if you're brand new to soldering. The way we do it in the workshop is different. So in the workshop, we use a stencil, which is kind of like how you make a screen printed t-shirt. You have a sheet of material with different kinds of holes and patterns in it, and you squeegee across some goop. And that goop is solder paste, and it puts solder paste right where it needs to go. And then you take those parts and you set them in place, and then we heat it up with hot air, and it melts everything into place. And 8-year-olds have done that workshop with me. So that is a very entry-level way of doing it if you have the workshop and someone kind of helping you along. And then we do some debugging at the end. There's always a few people who have, put a chip on backwards or forgot to solder one spot or switched around some components, little mistakes like that. So the workshop is really entry level, but the kits that I offer, the Hyve Hacker is a more medium level, and the Hyve Maker is made to be an entry level kit, but it doesn't involve any soldering. So it's not a soldering kit. It involves tuning and some assembly. You have to put there's little legs that go on it to put it together, and there's tuning. There's 12 points of tuning because there's 12 notes in an octave, so you have to tune all those, which is it takes a little bit of time and it takes a little bit of listening. So it's not something that's, if you could dedicate half hour to doing that and really focus on getting the notes tuned in just right, I think most anyone could do that, but it takes a little bit of dedication to getting it right in tune. It's easy to, it's sort of like learning to tune a guitar or something. You kind of find the note and you fine tune it, and
or if you have like a modular synth with different oscillator, you have to kind of keep them in tune. And it's funny because I was thinking just yesterday, we had this period years ago at the very beginning of electronic instruments. Many traditional musicians would not consider electronic instruments as actual real instruments. But especially with analog, we're still dealing with physical phenomenon, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know anything about it, but as you explain it to me, it seems to me like it requires a certain amount of craftsmanship to be able to not only assemble, but also create instruments like that. And it seems like more and more when I hear about creators like you, you look much more to me like someone, I don't know the English word, I'm sorry, maybe you can help me out. People who build violins or pianos,
like a luthier.
Yeah, luthier, or it's the same word as in French actually, luthier. Because when you mentioned the Hyve Hacker kit and people doing different things, and it's like you have this idea of an instrument, and then every, say, luthier of electronic instruments would kind of bring in their own twist. So how can you do that? If you can explain it in a simple way, what are the kind of things that you can do if you're really good in electronics and you get the hacker kit?
Yeah.
What's like, if sky is the limit, where's the sky?
Well, I've seen people have added knobs and other controls to change, global tuning and drift and modulation. You can add I saw somebody who added like a control voltage input, which would like modulate the oscillators. And so you could plug in from a modular synthesizer into the Hyve, and whatever you put in would modulate the oscillator. So as you're playing, it's being modulated by the analog modular, some sort of LFOs or sequencer that's changing the way that the oscillators are reacting. But what I usually do, which I think is also a very interesting and not as hacky way of doing things, but is to run the output into like guitar effects or into a synthesizer processing. And the output is stereo. And so as you're playing, as you move right and left, the sound is going to the right and left in stereo.
Oh.
And so each of those can be processed in a different way. And for example, let's say you have some distortion on this side and some delay on this side. As you move your finger back and forth, you're getting more of the distorted sound or more of the delay sound. And so you can kind of control the way that that processing is happening by the way that you perform it, which I think is kind of interesting. And so I oftentimes use like guitar effects or modular stuff to run the Hyve into, like as a sound source. And the way that the Hyve is set up, it has 60 notes of polyphony. So that means you can play all 60 notes at once and get like just really massive amounts of sound clusters, and that allows you to like, it's a lot of material to kind of like process, and you can filter it. You can, change the way that sounds, running it through all sorts of things. So I think that's kind of an interesting just way of extending the sound that's possible. But on the hacking side, one of the hacks that I really like that I kind of built into the Hyve is to put two of these together. I'll show you. So they actually fit together side by side. Like so, and you can see that, I'll turn it over here. You can see the keyboard then is continuous here, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right? The B to the C is the right gap, so you can actually make longer versions of it if you want. And then you can retune all the oscillators so you have different octaves and have a larger playing surface. It's a pretty easy hack. You just have to join them together with a few wires and leave off some components so that they all are mixed together into one output. But it's kind of a cool way of just like adding even more. And so the Hyve Hacker that's for sale on the website, you get two. You get two of these. So you get two of these. So the idea with having two in the Hyve Hacker kit is that I thought it really encouraged people to try new things, because you could combine them together. That's one of the ways, but also you could make one in the standard way and then make one in a weird way, and then you kind of have both, or you make, or you invite your friend over and you both make it together, and then they get one and you have one, or something like that. I really wanted people to see ways that having two of them could be this opportunity to extend those possibilities and like share it with someone else, have these other kinds of hacks that are possible. So that was the intention behind the Hyve Hacker.
So I wanted to ask also, so basically, how do you play it, and how can it be played? Like, because again, I don't see any filters and stuff like that, and it definitely sounds very expressive. So what are the possibilities of modulation that you can do with your hands, and how does it work? Like, if you can maybe demonstrate.
Sure. So I've been doing, one of the really exciting things for me about a new instrument is that there's no right or wrong way of playing it. There's no established way of playing it. And so when I see other people playing it, I'm actually really excited that people are doing things that I didn't necessarily intend or plan that they would do. And there's so many different kind of unusual approaches that I think are really interesting, whether it's like, for example, one of the weirder things you can do is just blow on the surface with your breath and trigger notes, because it's really sensitive. The whole surface is very sensitive to really small touches. And so you blow on it. You can get things like that.
You don't have to if you spit on it, it will do like a sustain on a piano.
So that's kind of one of the things that I hadn't planned for it to be a breath instrument, but it's just sensitive enough that all those kind of possibilities are there, and I'm interested to see what people come up with. People have used like a straw to blow on a certain spot or something like that, so like right now it's just blowing in this whole area and all these notes are happening. But I can show you a few of the basic ways that it responds to touch.
Yeah, sure.
Maybe I'll put the camera down a little bit. So right now I'm using a Big Sky reverb, and can you see all right? I'll maybe move a little closer here.
That's good.
So and I should mention too, this is a headphone jack, and this is just power. So the power that it comes with is just a little power brick like this with a which is a 9-volt. It takes a 9-volt battery, so it's just 9-volt power. You can also, this is just portable, so I thought it was kind of a fun way to just walk around, and you could have headphones in and play on the bus or something. Yeah. So I'll start with the keyboard section down here. At the top, you're getting the highest notes. And then as you move down, and then right and left, probably can't hear it very well with this microphone setup, but, and then how hard you're pressing. Really light touch. So that's those are the 3 dimensions that you get: the pressure, right and left, and up and down. And so in order to kind of take advantage of that, you can also play each of those independently. So if you're playing here, so you can get a lot of articulation just by moving like that. And then on the top section here, instead of putting the notes next to the notes that are closest in pitch, it puts the notes next to the notes that are closest in harmony. And so is a major triad, those 3 in a triangle. And so I can press all those. So that's kind of the reason why it's this size and shape, is so that you can play those kind of notes with one finger. And you can even play, even larger, 7th and 9th chords. You can also play scales. So you can play it that way, but I generally don't play a lot of melodies that way. So that's kind of how that whole section works.
A little bit. I'm not that familiar, but it looks a little bit like an accordion keyboard.
Yeah, there are some accordions that use a hexagon layout like that to do similar kinds of chord patterns and things. Yeah.
Yeah.
This one is based on like Edward Euler. I think is his name, from like the 1600s, who is a mathematician and came up with these triangular grids of Western tonality. So he was an important person in geometry and music. He was a mathematician.
It's funny because lately there seems to be a lot more people who are trying to go out of into microtonality and stuff, which is amazing. I mean, those new sounds, and especially with today's tool. But your sense seems to be, extremely, like it's an elegant way, in my opinion, to kind of bridge the gap between science and mathematics and music.
Yeah,
and it's not like, I don't know if it's a huge gap or if it's the same thing. It
used to be a much smaller gap. I mean, people like Pythagoras, were very interested in the way that, planetary movement related to geometry and music, and it was all sort of seen as one area of study. And, nowadays things are much more disciplinary. I mean, I work at the university, and so I see, engineers are in this building and artists are in this building, and they don't really talk to each other a lot. And I think that's my hope, is that in places like the university and, higher learning in general, that there's more collaboration, interdisciplinary places where artists, engineers, entrepreneurs, philosophers can get together and find those places where interesting possibilities are there in combining their different fields and exploring these regions of study that are just not really falling into one discipline or another.
And maybe, I mean, maybe it's it's one of the ways forward. I think it may be. And I don't know. I've been thinking a lot about music this, last years, and how it's built and how it's made and why does it sound good. I mean, and the more I think about it, but obviously I'm biased as a musician. It seems to me like music is a model of everything in a weird way, because everything can relate, as you mentioned, can be the movement of planets,
Mm-hmm.
which can be rhythmical, which can have a certain frequency, and the way the color works together, and
Mm-hmm.
harmony, and it can, like, even in the interpersonal relationship, we tend to use, like, we're on the same wavelength.
Mm-hmm.
This kind of expression, and the more I think people are looking into music, because it's not especially my ideas I think about, but it's much more like smarter people who I listen to, and it makes me think. But instruments like that, and the way you explain, you build it, it seems to me like it's a very novel and very new way to look at the world.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe using music as a how can I put it, as a bridge. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how many people are looking into stuff like that, and I couldn't tell, to save my life, whether or not it's relevant. But it certainly seems relevant. And as new instruments, new technology comes out, especially music instruments, that we're getting closer and closer to maybe that kind of understanding that everything might be related to. Because when you think about it, music doesn't really make sense, from a purely pragmatic perspective. It's just notes, but it does for some reason.
It's a very human thing. There's
Yeah.
something about human brains that music connects with. And it's funny you should mention, like, I worked on a structural engineering project where we were trying to kind of detect if bridges were getting damaged or starting to become weakened enough that they were dangerous. So it was like this. There was all these sensors on these bridges, and then you could see how the bridge was moving. There were like vibration sensors, basically like pickups all over this bridge. And so we made this network of all these sensors that would communicate back and say, okay, this is what this bridge is doing, how it's moving. Because, these very big bridges, they move a lot. They move a lot more than you'd think. And in some ways they move, they're supposed to move. In other ways they move, you can tell that there's some crack in them or damage. And so we made this sensor array, and I always was thinking about it as like this really long bass guitar string that was stretched across this river, and that there were all these pickups on it, and the way that it was vibrating and making that sound could tell you, about those frequencies that were vibrating in that guitar string,
And I think it
was like it was a really interesting, because a lot of the engineers who were on the project didn't, they weren't really musicians. So I was always thinking about it this other way. And I thought it was pretty interesting to kind of see the world as these like musical frequencies and how they relate, because there are certain mathematical and physical relationships between different kinds of vibrations and how they affect each other. That an octave is an octave because of the way it travels through space at a certain distance. An octave higher will have traveled twice, will have created twice as many fluctuations as an octave lower than it. So, those are like physically resonant things, that a certain distance and material will resonate at certain pitches, and those are like universal.
And then you have the harmonics, like the fifth and the major third and so on. And it seems like it's embedded in nature for some reason, and for some reason that it's definitely unknown. It seems, at least to me, we human being, and I think conscious being, may respond to that in a very like it's like a major third, it's happy, and minor third, it's sad. We associate, and it's meaningful to us at a level that is, I wouldn't say it's not scientific, but it's not physical. Definitely not physical. And for some reason, all these like the ratios and they exist like with or without us to experience them, but they are there. And do you think, I don't know if you know anything, but like especially like in different fields that don't necessarily have anything to do with music directly, that trying to look at the relationship between some frequencies and vibrating patterns could be one of the ways to make science maybe move forward.
Yeah, I think engineers do often talk about the relationships, mathematical relationships between frequencies and things like that. But what you were talking about, that joy that we experience or the emotional component of it, that's not an engineering thing at all. But there's a very close relationship between the way we experience those frequencies and how our emotional and creative side is activated. And so like that area there is really interesting to me, because I think there's a real potential for someone to think in both ways. And I think creativity oftentimes is about thinking in different ways at the same time and not just thinking in one way. And so for me, that creative possibility for people could be that they think about, I know that there's this mathematical, X times 2 relationship between these frequencies, but then there's also like this like emotional potential and expression in that. And when we think about things as it being that nuanced and complex and able to kind of simultaneously kind of do a little math in our head about that, and also think about that those tuning ratios as an emotional expressive thing, just the way that a certain jazz chord has a certain feel, or even like you were mentioning the mathematics of tuning. There's people who are doing just intonation, which really causes those relationships to be precisely mathematical small number intervals, 2 to 3 or 3 to 4, things like that, and so and you can retune the Hyve to do that, or even microtonal. That's a really interesting place where people are thinking about, what are those other ratios that aren't in our 12-tone scale? What do those ratios feel like? And what are they? How do we quantify them numerically? I went to.
They carry meaning.
Yeah, I think I remember I saw an instrument made by Harry Parch. Do you know who Harry Parch is? He did a lot of microtonal music.
All right. I don't think I do.
Really interesting guy. He was here. He has some history of being at the University of Illinois. And we have some of his artifacts in our collection here, which are really interesting. And he made this, I think it's like a cello neck attached to a viola body.
Yeah.
And so it's like a longer neck on a viola. And he had marked out intervals on there that were all of these ratios, and I think his system was all like 26 bass, 26 notes per octave. And so all the ratios were like 9 to 13 or something like that. That was the name of the note. Instead of A, B, and C, he called them 9, 13 or something like that. And so all of these notes were marked off on the neck, and then the score showed the different ratios that you would play. And so the performer who was demonstrating it, he showed me a lot of those details, and you could really hear the difference between those subtle little changes, and like that one's sort of like a sharp major third, and that one's sort of like a flat minor, and they have a different feeling, and I really like those kinds of things because they do tend to be very academic and kind of technical, numerical, but also you're really thinking about how does that feel to play that interval, and what is the expression that it, what does it mean to us as humans when we hear that kind of sound? It means something to us. It's meaningful. It's emotional. It's beautiful. It's personal. And, I think in general, that's kind of what I hope that all people are thinking about is how do we do things in ways that are, correct and good, but also how they serve humanity to make something that we can appreciate and is beautiful, and make our world a more beautiful place, and not just a more technically accurate place.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that, because I've been trying to familiarize myself a little bit with microtonal music, and I've stumbled upon a few pieces. I cannot remember, but I remember that special feeling that at first you need to get used to the sound. It sounds somewhat false. Mm-hmm. Once you get into that, yeah, it's new kind of way of feeling the music, maybe a little bit deeper. And I'm not entirely sold right now, still on, and that's probably ignorance on my part, on microtonal music, because I still believe that we respond naturally to the music that we listen. It's. Mm-hmm. But maybe, I don't know. Do you think the future of music will be more into microtonality?
I think there are some places where that's happening, especially when there's pop music that's incorporating elements from traditional cultural musics that use different scales. Like, you might see a certain Arabic scale kind of in a hip hop song, like a sample or something. And like some scales, especially Middle Eastern scales and things, have different instruments, or there's some really interesting scales in Indian music that use.
Sorry, it's cutting out.
And so I think, as more awareness of that, and there's more people who are like being exposed to it, it does have a certain sound and flavor that I think, I don't know, I hate to say that pop music might be the way that people encounter it, but that's probably likely, is that those they reach a larger audience through pop music or sampling and things like that. So, but it does exist in a lot of those traditional music styles and instruments that are built for those kinds of tonalities.
It's not brand new. Like people have been microtonal music for a long time. And now that I think of it, I don't know if it's maybe I'm just besides the point, but I was thinking about this young composer. He's kind of a genius. You probably heard of him, Jacob Collier.
I'm not sure I've heard of him.
Well, look him up. Yeah, he's kind of this music genius.
Okay.
Like, there's a video online with him and talking about music theory with Herbie Hancock.
Okay.
And he has this YouTube channel, and he has these tracks which sound somewhat like popular music, but when you really look into the music and the harmony that happens, there are there's this one track, when you go to the beginning of the track and you go to the end, directly to the end, you can hear it's not tuned the same. When you listen to the whole track, you cannot notice, but when you go to the beginning and the end, the whole tuning has shifted.
Okay.
And he does that in a very musical ways. So if you don't know about him, definitely look him up, Jacob Collier.
Oh, that sounds really interesting.
Yeah, and because he makes like extremely complex music theory kind of concepts sound very musical.
Yeah.
because that's the thing with like theoretically complex music. It's often very difficult to listen to, and in that case, it sounds like pop music. You know, you have this very groove, like neo soul kind of track song, and then you have this kind of like tribal, ethnic kind of ambient kind of music. And he has an amazing voice, and yeah, I think thinking about what you say, there's no real way, like there's no way around it. Like music is going already into that direction, and all these like ancient scales and instruments and ways of making music. And it seems like with instruments like yours that open these possibilities, because you mentioned you can adjust the tuning to make it play like, how do you do that? How would you do that?
Yeah, well, it's when you build it, you end up with these little trim pots here. They're like a little thing you turn with a little tool, tuning those, and there's one on each note. You can see here is B, A sharp, A, and so on, and you tune them all across there. So there's 12 different points that you tune, which is the 12 notes represented there, and those notes are also tuned the same. When you change that tuning, it changes the top section and the bottom section. They're both they both use the same oscillators. So you're changing an oscillator tuning, and when you tune that in, then whatever you tune for the C, you get right there on the C. So if you tune C higher or lower, you'll get. So I've tuned that to equal temperament, but you could tune it to just intonation. You could tune it all the same. You could tune it a lot of different ways. So in fact, when I first make these, when you first build them, a lot of the notes end up kind of just by default kind of it sounding like the same tuning. And so you can play that. And it's sort of like just a totally different way of thinking about how to play notes when they're all just tuned to something similar.
You just tune them all to a C, for example, and then all right,
or like slightly out of tune, different kinds of beating, and you can play that. So yeah, and if you get into deeper hacking, you can retune them to be super low, so they're just click 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 click, or you can tune them even higher than you can hear and have interference happening between them. So depending on, you have to resolder parts if you want to tune them to more extreme ways. The tuning right now is a little less than an octave range on those trim pots, which is just like, it's just enough that you can tune it in, but it's also gives you some range to retune it. But if you wanted to make it, say 4 octaves higher or 8 octaves lower, you could just change the parts on there and resolder in some different size capacitors to make the tuning just something totally different. In fact, that's what you do if you put two of them together. And you want to retune, you'll just replace the capacitors. Is the easiest way to do it.
But for someone like me who doesn't solder or anything, is there any way, maybe in a next like V2 another version, like do you plan to evolve on this design and maybe do something that would offer, for example, how can I, like front facing tuning controls and stuff like that?
I've gotten so much great feedback. One of the things about doing the Kickstarter that was really great was hearing what people thought, people's responses. There are a lot of things that people think about in a synthesizer, like having a bunch of knobs, or having, a transposition control or things like that, or having a big filter knob that you can turn. And in order to get this project made, I had to kind of limit the scope of it. I didn't want it to just grow and grow. And so it was kind of a place to start. And as people are hacking it and as people are, thinking of new ideas and new ways of using it, I want to think about what it looks like for this to evolve. And right now, I don't have any new versions in the works. Right now, I'm just trying to keep the stock in our web store. We're kind of trying to keep everything in stock so that people can buy it and get it right away. Right now we have some pre-orders for some of the stuff because we don't have it in stock. It's the manufacturing takes a little while. So I haven't been actively working on new versions, but eventually that's something that I've gotten so much good feedback from people. So many people are saying, "Oh, well, I like this about it, but what if it worked this way?"
Yeah.
I love this part of it. What if it were twice as big and I could stick it in my Euro rack, and or something like that, I mean, those are all really interesting possibilities. I love when people get excited and start to share these thoughts and ideas. I mean, I'm a really big proponent of brainstorming. Even if an idea sounds totally too far out there to even get done, I think it's interesting to like talk about it and share it and think about what it would take to do that, or what are the really interesting possibilities that would open up. So yeah, I'm totally seeing this as the start of something that I don't know where it's going exactly, but
You don't have to know.
I think it's an interesting place to kind of get an idea out there. This is my first time doing Kickstarter, and as a lot of people know, Kickstarter is sort of this crazy whirlwind of a process where you put an idea out there, you try to explain it as well as you can, and people who are supporting you are very generous, and they really get inspired by your project, and it's a real wonderful community that's created. And if it's successful, then you have all these people who are excited about your idea, want to see it happen, are helping you do the manufacturing, and that was just amazing to me. I got such a great response from Kickstarter. When you first launch it, it's like that. So you work on getting the video and the pictures and the text and getting everything put together so that you can actually communicate your idea. And you hope that people will be interested and excited, but you don't really know until you launch it and it goes public, and it's this big public thing. Everybody can see, are people interested? Did it succeed? Did it fail?
Yeah.
What percentage of your goal did you get? And all that sort of thing. And it was such an amazing process for me because I had so many really amazing people backing the project and making it happen. I couldn't have done it without all those people. And so to me, that tells me that, this idea kind of connected with people in a certain way, that they got excited about it, they were interested in something here. And the more I dig into that and share it and see the music that people are making, the more I get a better sense on what is really the core inspiring part of it and how that can be built into some other possibilities.
Yeah. Yeah, really, like it's a new way, I feel, for like I've been doing a little bit of business myself, and it seems to me like the old days of people saying, "Oh, if you want to be good at business, you need to lie, and you need to basically be, take advantage of people." I think this era is about to be over now, because especially like things like Kickstarter that allow people who are really passionate to create something that's really great, and also other people to directly like sponsor creators like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it feels like there are many very exciting new devices, instruments, ideas that kind of come out thanks to the internet and what it brought to the table. Like people like to kind of rant on the internet, "Oh, it's very bad," but it's also very good. It's also because of the internet we have like conversations like that about like if it was 30 years ago, this would not have been possible. You would need to find a banker that would back your
Yeah,
idea,
exactly.
or a company that would say, "Oh, that is too risky. We're not taking the chance on you. We'd rather make something that we already know that works."
Right.
And now we have this crazy whirlwind of new ideas and products, and the bigger companies seem to struggle to keep up. Like we have extremely exciting new companies that do exciting stuff, like yourself, like especially also in the modular synth world. We have like companies using digital ideas and integrating them into the modular and create, like we've had this podcast episode with, I don't know, you probably know about him. He's a composer and YouTuber. His name is Hainbach.
Yeah, I know Hainbach.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
he's a great guy.
Yeah.
He plays the Hyve too.
Yeah, actually, yeah.
Yeah.
And so we have all these crazy people doing crazy things, and regular people, and like myself and other people, we realize through people like you that life doesn't have to be the way, you know, society tells us how it's supposed to be. Life can be whatever we can make it. Like someone, you can go to college and learn a little bit of electrical engineering, electronics, and make a Kickstarter because you have that great idea, and then you suddenly connect with all these people all over the world that say, oh, you have a great idea. Let me give you $10. Let me give you $50. Let me give you maybe someone who will give you 5,000. And all of a sudden you are able to make something happen. Change the way, for example, for you, have an influence, a durable influence, because this synth and other similar instruments like the continuum fingerboard and instruments like the lyra from Soma, it's very important, because once you're gone, Skot Wiedmann is not on this earth. This little instruments that you just made, it will still have an impact on the way people make music. And now it's out there. It's yours, your idea, but it's now, as you say, especially with the hacker, it's everyone's instrument. And in that sense, whether you want it or not, right now, it will have an impact and influence the way people make music today, tomorrow, in 10 years, in 15 years, and maybe 500 years, if we're still there, you know. And that's important. And I think that's something that many people overlook often about the internet, is the ability for ideas, novel ideas, original ideas, to just find their way into the world and influence. And seeing you doing that, it's you know, you other people, Hainbach, using old school, you know, testing equipment.
Yeah.
And I thank you for that, because it still takes a lot of work, you know, to make it happen. It's one thing to have the idea, one other thing to have the money, you know, through Kickstarter, but then you still have to make it happen. So how long of a process was it from prototype to the final product right now?
It's been over 5 years right now. I mean, my original prototypes were workshop versions, and so I think that actually was a lot different than a lot of other Kickstarters where I had built things and taught people, and so it wasn't just an idea. I think there is a little bit of fear that people have with Kickstarter, that you have a great idea, but can you really manufacture it? Yeah. You know, those are different skills. And so I had already been building these with, you know, 100 people in a room at a workshop. So it kind of was a little bit proven in that way. Yeah. But it really is true that getting the Kickstarter up and getting a successful campaign is just a fraction of the work. The hard part is turning that into manufacturing and shipping, you know, starting a business where you're actually producing these things on a regular basis and then they're available. Yeah, it's not trivial at all. It's actually the hard part, you know, and that's something that I'm still, I mean, I kind of jumped into it. I took a little bit of, I did some classes in the business area here at the university, but it's not something I have, you know, a degree. I don't have a degree in business. So I'm learning a lot of things as I go, and just, you know, trying to start small and build things up, trying to just keep in stock product. Yeah. It's sort of like the stupidest thing, but just keeping things in stock is, you know, there's a lot of little components that go into keeping something in a store where you could click on a button online and buy it. Yeah. So that's kind of like where I'm at right now, and just always trying to learn and improve things. And Yeah, hopefully there is some longevity. I published all of the schematics and everything so that other people can see how it's made. It's not there's no patents or secrets,
Yeah.
copyright protection. I wanted people to see how it's made, be able to change it and hack it and make their own versions. And so, I shared that stuff. I mean, so, it's supposed to be educational, where people can learn about it and be inspired. I think I've talked to a few people who are doing, they're taking parts of this circuitry and some other thing and combining it together and then, coming up with something new, which is great. I mean, I think that's where those ideas can actually live on, is when people are using them and changing them and turning them into their own new ideas. I mean, I like that. This isn't really just my idea. I mean, I was inspired by so many things and people who, helped me get to this point, and
Yeah.
taking ideas from all sorts of crazy places. I mean, I think back to where I was years ago, and when I started building synthesizers just at home, trying to figure it out myself, and ended up meeting Grant Richter because I lived in Milwaukee at the time, and became friends with him. And he introduced me to Rex Probe, and I started working on the Surge line with Rex for a
Yeah.
while. And between Grant's interest in the Buchla stuff and the Surge stuff that I was working on, touch-based instruments kind of were there for a long time ago.
Yeah.
And so, that stuff and just being around people who had a history of working on that stuff, people who were there back in the early 70s that, in California with Don Buchla and Morton Subotnick and all those people, that was just, you can't really, this wouldn't exist without those experiences that I had with those people, and um, so it is standing on the shoulders of giants for sure. I mean, this is like just a small slice of things that I've experienced in my life, things that people have taught me, putting
Yeah.
it together in a way that I thought was interesting and trying to share it with other people and teach them how to make it for themselves. So I do hope that, that inspiration continues and other people can come up with their own new ideas and have it evolve and seeing what possibilities there are that I haven't ever thought of.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like you just build the piano or the guitar, and then sometime down the line, someone is going to come up with an electric piano or an electric
Yeah.
guitar or a arranger or whatever.
Hmm.
And but that's really great. Just to and then we can wrap it up. Have you seen? Because you mentioned standing on the shoulder of giants and the synth making industry of the late 70s 70s. Have you seen that viral story? It's probably fake. I don't know. What of
About the book
it-
club modular.
yeah.
Yeah.
What do you
Yeah.
think? Like it seems like fake news and stuff like that. It seems like some like clickbait, but yeah. What do you think about it?
Well, there's part of me that feels like it's a little bit too good of a story to be true.
Yeah,
But I mean, there definitely was a counterculture at that time,
yeah,
uh, in San Francisco and in other places that, where there certainly would have been all of the elements necessary for those kinds of things to happen. And, musicians and counterculture people have always been experimenting that way, whether it's experimenting with consciousness or with sound or,
yeah,
with the way that the brain is working, how we can alter our brains to, open other possibilities of thinking.
yeah,
And I mean, I think it's a really funny story. It's one of those stories that you kind of want to be true, but sort of think it's probably just folklore, you
yeah,
know. And I mean, even I think about things in my family that are folklore too.
yeah,
There's a story my great grandfather, who passed away when my mom was 11, he was an inventor, and everybody sort of attributed all of these great inventions that he didn't quite finish,
Yeah.
And like if he would have only had a little more time, he would have like, created these things that in reality probably aren't even possible. Like I know there's been some talk in my family about that he was working on a perpetual motion machine. So I think it's so telling about how we think about those histories, what those people mean, and what influence they have. When we have these stories that just sort of ring true, we feel like, yeah, that person was so great, and they were in this moment when this thing was possible. Whether it happened or not isn't as important as it being this way of taking inspiration and thinking about how our past has gotten us to where we are, and what are we doing now in response to where we've been as as a species or as a planet, as life on Earth. And so I think thinking about the past, whether it's whether it's accurate to history or if it's just sort of an inspiring story, I think is less important than how it's personally meaningful to us and how it inspires us to do great things right now. And so I don't know. I'm not sure if that story is true or not. I think there's certainly some questions that make it seem like it may or may not be true, but it's also has enough truth in there that
it makes sense.
It makes sense enough, and
it
connects with how we think about that time and what it meant to experiment with sound in the late '60s. And
I had a Pro One back in the days, and I haven't checked, but I've heard that on the Pro One circuit board, they have drawings of Buddhist symbols and stuff like that. So I haven't checked out, but it's certainly like this era. I wasn't born. I was born in this era, but I wasn't around, and I was, and it certainly resonates with me in even the music as well as the instruments. Like it was almost like when you think about the kind of music that is current today, this era kind of was the womb, if that makes any sense. Like before, like it gave birth to the music that we have today, and all these psychedelics components, and for example, and the way to appreciate music and maybe look for different meaning, like the microtonal music, and get back to stuff like that and really try to figure out. So it's exciting times and very inspiring. And would you be okay to just to wrap the episode to make a little jam?
Sure, I'd love to.
All
right, I'll put this down. Let's see.
Yeah, I have to have one. All right, let's wrap this up. So this was Skot Wiedmann, Hyve Synth. I put every link in the description, so you can order the synth right now. But there's a waiting time.
There are some pre-orders for the premium ones with the wooden back have pre-orders, but the hacker is in stock. We ship those out right away.
Yeah. All right, great. So I'll put the link in the description. Thanks, that was amazing. So just to the viewers, this was Skot Wiedmann from Hyve Synth for Smallbrain Podcast. Please leave some comments in the comment section. It does help. Share it with your friends. Leave a like. And thank you for watching. Bye.
Thanks.